At 3:41 a.m., the ground screamed. A roar like thunder tearing through stone jolted me out of bed, and when I stumbled onto the porch with a flashlight, I saw the mountain was collapsing. A black wall of mud and shattered rock rolled down like liquid fire, swallowing trees, fences, and finally, Sophia Williams' glass mansion, the crown jewel of her so-called luxury resort. In less than a minute, her empire was gone, buried under 30 feet of earth. But that disaster didn't come out of nowhere. I had warned them. I had begged them. Months earlier, Sophia, our iron-fisted HOA president, ordered dynamite to blast into the mountain so she could build her dream resort, ignoring every geological warning, every historic landslide map. She thought her power could outvote gravity. That night the mountain proved her wrong. And trust me, this story only gets darker from here. Before we dive in, tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is. And don't forget to subscribe. You'll want to stay until the very end of this HOA nightmare. For most of my life, I never thought I'd end up here alone, living beneath a mountain that felt more alive than most of the people I'd met in my 64 years. My name is Michael Brown, retired geotechnical engineer, widower, and reluctant homeowner in what used to be a quiet community. Before the chaos, before the HOA turned into a private kingdom, Silver Crown Mountain stood behind my backyard like a sentinel. It wasn't grand like the Rockies, but it had a soul. The slopes were quilted in juniper pines, whispered with the morning fog, and a seasonal stream carried melted snow down to the valley. For a man trying to rebuild his life after burying his wife, it was peace, simple, grounding, sacred. When I first moved here, there was no HOA. Just a loose collection of neighbors, retirees, teachers, a wildlife photographer who rented her cabin to bird watchers. We had no gates, no manicured lawns, no committees arguing over the shade of beige on fences. Life was quiet. You waved at the mailman, you shared peaches from your garden, and nobody cared if your grass grew 2 inches too long. I thought I'd found a place to rest, maybe even heal. But quiet communities don't stay quiet forever. Money has a way of sniffing out beauty, and Silver Crown Mountain was too beautiful to stay untouched. 5 years after I arrived, the HOA was formed supposedly to handle trash pickup and maintain a shared mailbox cluster. Harmless enough. But the moment Sophia Williams moved in, everything changed. Sophia didn't ask to be president. She declared it. She was the kind of woman who wore white in the middle of mud season, her blonde hair always styled like she was heading to a gala, not a community meeting. Her first act as president wasn't to listen or learn, it was to dictate. She drafted a 40-page covenant update, grass length limits, paint color restrictions, and absurdly a mountain view preservation clause. No homeowner could plant a tree over 6 feet tall, because as she explained, we can't let personal landscaping obstruct community luxury. Luxury. That was her favorite word. At first, I avoided her. I skipped the HOA meetings. I told myself I'd earned the right to drink my coffee in peace and ignore the politics of petty power. But I didn't stay silent forever. Not when she unveiled her crown jewel, a luxury resort built into the side of Silver Crown Mountain. The first time I heard the words, I almost laughed. A resort here on decomposed granite and shale. This wasn't bedrock. It was fractured, layered, unstable. I knew because I had mapped terrain like this my entire career. I'd stood on ridges in Nevada that collapsed months after developers carved them open. I'd seen orchard land in Monterey vanish into a sink of mud because nobody listened to the warnings. When Sophia pitched her resort dream, I heard the echoes of every disaster I had tried to prevent. But Sophia didn't want to hear about risk. At the HOA meeting where she announced the plan, she strutted to the front of the clubhouse in a cream blazer and heels sharp enough to puncture concrete. Behind her, a projector displayed glossy renderings, a gondola, lifting tourists to the summit, glass-walled villas perched like trophies, an infinity pool spilling into the horizon. She sold it as Silver Crown Mountain Resort, a vision of elevated living. Investors she promised were lining up. I raised my hand reluctantly and cleared my throat. "Do you know what kind of soil you're sitting on?" Her smile didn't falter. "We've spoken to our architect. It's perfectly safe." "Architects aren't geologists," I said. "This mountain is decomposed granite mixed with shale. It's erosion-prone. You move this much earth, you're not building a resort. You're inviting a landslide." The room went still. For a moment, I thought maybe reason had landed, but then Sophia tilted her head like she was speaking to a child. "Mr. Brown, you're retired, aren't you?" That stung more than I let show. She didn't answer my warning. She dismissed me because my paycheck no longer came from consulting firms or government agencies. Retirement in her eyes meant irrelevance. I could see the gleam in her gaze. This wasn't about building safely. It was about building big. Still, I couldn't let it go. I dug into my old files, pulling geological surveys from decades earlier maps that showed slope failures dating back 40 years. I highlighted every scar of past landslides, every drainage channel that hinted at erosion waiting to happen. And I remembered a case I'd consulted on near Santa Clarita. Controlled blasting had turned a hillside into rubble, and 3 years later, heavy rains buried half a neighborhood. The signs were all here. Silver Crown Mountain wasn't a canvas for a resort. It was a loaded gun waiting for someone arrogant enough to pull the trigger. And Sophia had her finger on it. Neighbors were divided. Some, especially retirees like me, worried about safety. Others saw dollar signs. A resort will raise property values, one man argued. Tourism will bring business. They weren't wrong until the day it all came crashing down literally. But greed has a way of muting common sense. I tried again at the next meeting, bringing photos of runoff after a mild spring rain, mud lines 6 inches thick, pressing against my fence. This is after just 1 inch of rain, I told them. Imagine what happens when you blast apart the slope and add thousands of tons of concrete and steel. Sophia waved her manicured hand. Fear-mongering. We have permits. We have professionals. Permits don't stop gravity. Professionals don't rewrite geology. I went home that night angrier than I'd been in years. My wife, God rest her soul, used to call me her living seismograph. She could see the tension in my shoulders whenever I felt the ground shifting beneath my feet. That night my shoulders were tight as steel cables. The mountain wasn't groaning yet, but I could feel it stirring. Days later I woke to the sound I'd dreaded: boom. Windows rattled. Coffee spilled across my kitchen table. Dust billowed from the slopes, rolling like smoke from a wounded beast. They had done it. They'd blasted the mountain. When the dust cleared, I saw a jagged scar across the ridge, raw rock exposed like torn flesh. Birds stopped nesting. The deer trails vanished. It felt like watching a friend stabbed in broad daylight. My mountain, my refuge, had been mutilated in the name of profit. And standing in front of the destruction, giving interviews to a local camera crew, was Sophia Williams, champagne glass in hand, grinning like she had just unveiled the Eiffel Tower. That was the moment my patience died. The battle lines were drawn. It was no longer neighbor versus neighbor. It was me against the entire arrogance of an HOA drunk on power, and I swore as I stared up at that scar that I would not stay silent. The night after the first blast, I couldn't sleep. Dust hung in the air like a fog of accusation, coating my windows, settling into the creases of my porch furniture. I sat with a legal pad, jotting notes the way I had back in my working days: soil composition, slope angles, rainfall averages. It was muscle memory, my old instincts waking from retirement. Because this wasn't just arrogance anymore. It was reckless engineering, malpractice, hiding under the glossy veneer of luxury development. By the next HOA meeting, the whole neighborhood buzzed with talk of Sophia's grand project. Flyers had been mailed out with glossy renderings of the proposed resort. Silver Crown Mountain Resort, elevated living, the banner, proclaimed with promises of a skywalk over the valley, a spa carved into the hillside, even an aerial tram that would carry tourists right past our quiet homes. Investors from Los Angeles, I heard, had already reserved 3 of the proposed villas. The meeting hall was packed. Sophia walked in like she was hosting a TED Talk in a white blazer that seemed to glow under the fluorescent lights. Beside her, a man in a suit clutched a briefcase, her architect or so she introduced him. Ladies and gentlemen, she began, what we are about to embark upon will transform Silver Crown into the crown jewel of this entire county. This resort will increase our property values, bring prestige, and elevate our community into the future. She clicked her remote, and a slideshow began. Villas with cantilevered balconies jutting over the slope, an infinity pool shimmering against a backdrop of endless sky, a conference hall with glass walls. It was all breathtaking on paper. But to my eyes, every sharp edge was a fracture waiting to grow, every retaining wall was a band-aid slapped on an artery wound. I raised my hand, waited until she reluctantly acknowledged me. Miss Williams, have you conducted a slope stability analysis post-blasting? Her smile tightened. We've had experts review the site. I stood. I've reviewed it too. Decomposed granite mixed with shale is notorious for slope failure. And let's not forget the northern face of Silver Crown collapsed in 1978 after a minor storm. There are records in the county archive. Some neighbors turned their heads toward me. Others frowned, annoyed I was spoiling the sales pitch. Sophia kept her composure, but her eyes narrowed. Mr. Brown, with all due respect, your career is behind you. We're consulting licensed professionals who are active today. An architect is not a geotechnical engineer, I snapped. Permits don't change the laws of gravity. You dynamite that mountain, you destabilize everything beneath it, your homes, your children's bedrooms, the aquifer that supplies our wells. A murmur rippled through the room. For a moment I thought reason might prevail. But then Sophia's voice rose polished and commanding. We cannot let fear stand in the way of progress. This is about opportunity for all of us. Don't let one man's paranoia derail our future. Applause followed, led by her allies. My face burned. I felt like Cassandra in the Greek myths, cursed to speak truths no one would believe until it was too late. After the meeting, as I gathered my notes, a man approached me, Tom Delaney, an accountant with 2 young kids. He spoke quietly, eyes darting toward Sophia's circle of friends. I believe you, he said. I've already seen cracks forming in my basement, but no one wants to stand up to her. You don't need to stand up, I told him. You just need to document. Keep records, photographs, dates, measurements. If it comes to court, evidence is what matters. He nodded, pocketed his phone, and slipped out. Meanwhile, Sophia escalated. The following week, an HOA newsletter appeared in every mailbox. Certain residents, it read, have a history of obstructionism and emotional instability. While we value their prior contributions, they are no longer licensed or practicing professionals. Their speculative fears should not distract from the exciting progress we're making. My name wasn't printed, but it didn't need to be. Everyone knew who she meant. It stung, but it didn't surprise me. In my career, I'd seen developers smear anyone who questioned them. Intimidation was a tool of the trade, but this was different. This was my home, my neighbors, my mountain. So I dug deeper. I drove to the county archive, pulled microfilm records of past slides. I highlighted the 1978 disaster that wiped out half an orchard. I printed rainfall records from the past decade, pointing to the fact that after years of drought, the region was overdue for a severe atmospheric river. I even contacted an old colleague, Samuel Klein, who still worked as a geotechnical consultant. When I emailed him the slope photos, his response came fast. Michael, that cut is unstable. If they keep building, failure is a matter of when, not if. I asked if he'd be willing to put that in writing. He hesitated. His firm did occasional work for developers. But finally, he sent me a signed statement. In my professional opinion, post-blast slope, stability is inadequate. Continued construction without remediation presents high risk of landslide. It wasn't a full report, but it was something. I submitted all of it to the city zoning board, attaching maps, rainfall data, Klein's memo. Weeks passed before they even acknowledged receipt. Bureaucracy moved slower than erosion, and in the meantime, bulldozers carved deeper into the mountain. I started walking the ridge every evening, taking photographs, planting stakes to measure soil movement. Already within 2 weeks, I could see shifts just millimeters at first, then centimeters. One retaining wall at the construction site had developed a hairline crack. The soil beneath looked darker, damp. It was the mountain whispering, I'm moving. Then came the first rain, not a storm, just a soft drizzle. By morning, a thick ribbon of red mud had slumped to the edge of my fence line, 6 inches deep. That was after 1 inch of rainfall. I measured it, photographed it, logged it into my growing file titled HOA Negligence, Resort Phase 1. But when I tried to present my findings at the next meeting, Sophia cut me off. Mr. Brown, this board has voted to limit unsolicited expert opinions. Unless requested, your reports are not admissible. You didn't even read them, I snapped. Because they're not relevant, she shot back, her voice sharp as glass. This community supports progress. If you can't handle that, perhaps Silver Crown is no longer the right place for you. The room went silent. Neighbors avoided my eyes. The message was clear. I was being exiled from my own community. That night, as I sat on my porch, listening to the mountain's uneasy groans, anger twisted into something heavier, fear. Not for myself, but for the families down the slope. For Tom's children, for Rosa Thompson, who lived 2 houses down and had just remodeled her kitchen. They didn't understand what was coming. They trusted permits and politicians. But mountains don't care about paperwork. And I knew with every fiber of my being that Sophia's dream resort was no dream at all. It was a nightmare waiting to wake. The morning, the second round of blasting shook the valley. I knew the mountain wasn't going to forgive us. The sound was deeper this time, like a wounded animal groaning under the weight of an old scar torn open again. My coffee sloshed out of the cup as the windows rattled. I stepped outside and felt the tremor through my slippers, a vibration that lingered long after the echo of dynamite faded. Above me, Silver Crown Mountain looked mutilated. Where once there had been terraces of pine and juniper, there was now a jagged wound, raw rock crumbling down into scree. Dust plumed in the air, settling over rooftops like gray snow. A hawk wheeled overhead, screeching, then vanished. Even the birds knew this place wasn't safe anymore. But if you asked Sophia Williams, our self-anointed queen of the HOA, it was a triumph. That very afternoon, she staged a press conference at the construction site. She didn't just wear white this time. She wore a tailored cream suit with a golden brooch that caught every glint of the afternoon Sunday. Behind her, a temporary stage had been erected draped with a banner, Silver Crown Mountain Resort, a vision of elevated living. Neighbors gathered, some curious, others skeptical, but Sophia's investors were front and center. Champagne flutes clinked. A drone buzzed overhead, filming the spectacle for social media. She gestured like a politician at a campaign rally. Today, she announced, we take the first bold step toward redefining what luxury means in our community. Silver Crown Mountain is not just a backdrop, it is our future. Applause erupted from her circle. I stood at the edge of the crowd, arms crossed, fists clenched so tight my knuckles hurt. My eyes weren't on the champagne or the drones. They were on the slope above, where the newly carved, cut, exposed layers of fractured granite streaked with clay. It wasn't stability I saw, it was a countdown clock. When the speeches ended, I approached the stage holding a manila folder thick with documents. Sophia, I said loud enough for the microphone to pick up, you've destabilized the slope. This is no longer just opinion. This is evidence. She looked down at me, unbothered lips curving in a politician's smile. Mr. Brown, we've had experts assure us. I cut her off, sliding photographs onto the stage. Experts who never tested the post-blast slope. Here, pictures from last week's rainfall. 6 inches of mud at my property line after 1 inch of rain. Historical maps showing a landslide in this exact location in 1978. And this, I held up a signed declaration from Samuel Klein, a licensed geotechnical engineer. He flagged major risk in this zone. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Sophia's smile didn't break, but her eyes flickered sharp and cold. She leaned into the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, I respect Mr. Brown's enthusiasm, but we must not allow fear-mongering to derail progress. If he has concerns, he should direct them to the county like everyone else. Meanwhile, we move forward. Her dismissal stung, but it wasn't just about me anymore. It was about the neighbors staring wide-eyed at the photos I'd laid down, whispering to each other. Seeds of doubt had been planted, even if she tried to smother them under champagne bubbles and PR slogans. That night, I filed a formal complaint with the city zoning board, attaching every piece of evidence I had. Soil maps, rainfall logs, Klein's statement, photographs of the scarred slope. I CC'd the county environmental office and even reached out to an old friend who still worked at CalGeo. But government wheels turned slowly, and Sophia knew it. By the time I received an automated case, received email, bulldozers were already carving access roads for the resort. The days that followed felt surreal. Construction trucks rumbled past my house at dawn, engines growling as if mocking my warnings. Dust coated everything, cars, windowsills, even the coffee table inside, no matter how often I wiped it down. My neighbor Rosa complained that her toddler had developed a cough. Tom Delaney told me cracks were spiderwebbing across his garage floor. Yet every night, Sophia strutted through the construction site like a general surveying her army. One afternoon, I walked up the public easement near her mansion in progress. The skeleton of the building was already rising, steel beams stabbing into the air, framing out glass walls that would someday offer a panoramic view of the valley. It looked less like a home and more like a monument to hubris. Hey, a voice barked. I turned to see the contractor, a thick-shouldered man with a tape measure clipped to his belt. His name was Vince, Sophia's cousin, as I later discovered. You keep snooping, we'll call the sheriff. This is a public road, I said evenly. He smirked. You got a problem with progress. Not progress, I replied. With arrogance. He laughed, shaking his head. Old folks like you don't get it. Nobody wants your little birdwatcher cabin anymore. People want luxury. Views. Sophia's building the future. I stepped closer, lowering my voice. And when the mountain slides, you'll wish you had my elevation. For just a moment, his smirk faltered. But then he waved me off like a fly and went back to shouting orders at his crew. That night, I doubled my efforts. I set up motion-triggered trail cameras along the ridge. I planted survey stakes to measure soil creep. Every day I logged data into a folder I titled HOA Negligence, Resort Phase 1. My house turned into a war room. Blueprints, aerial maps, printed photographs pinned across the walls like a detective's caseboard. I wasn't just preparing evidence for the city anymore. I was preparing for a disaster I knew was inevitable. Weeks passed. Then came another rain, not a storm, just a steady drizzle. but the mountain whispered louder this time. I heard it while standing on my back deck, a long groaning sigh that made the boards beneath my feet creak. When I shone my flashlight up the slope, I saw it a thin sheet of mud oozing downward, subtle but undeniable. I documented it all. Timestamps, photographs, soil displacement measurements. But while the mountain whispered, Sophia roared louder. She launched a smear campaign, emails, newsletters, even whispers on neighborhood Facebook groups. Suddenly I was unstable, paranoid, and obstructionist. One anonymous post even suggested I was sabotaging the slope myself to prove a point. It was absurd, but effective. Some neighbors stopped waving when I walked by. Others avoided eye contact altogether. That's the thing about lies, they don't need to be true, just loud. Still, I refused to back down. Because while Sophia played politics, the mountain was shifting under our feet. And I knew one truth, more certain than any HOA bylaw or county permit: when the earth decides to move, no vote, no rule, no white blazer can stop it. The first real storm of the season didn't start with a bang, it started with a whisper. Low gray clouds rolled over Silver Crown Mountain like a heavy blanket flattening the horizon. The air thickened, damp and electric, and I could feel the tension in my bones long before the first raindrop fell. My wife used to joke that I was a human barometer. I'd grow restless before a storm, pacing the house, muttering about pressure changes. That night, as the drizzle began to dot the deck, my stomach clenched. I knew the mountain wasn't ready. By midnight, the drizzle had become a steady rain. Water ran in ribbons down the scars left by blasting dark streaks against the raw granite face. From my back window, I could see the slope shimmering like wet clay, glistening under the beam of my floodlight. The retaining walls Sophia's cousin had rushed to pour leaned just slightly out of line, their bases stained with mud. I stepped into my boots, grabbed my flashlight, and trudged outside. The rain plastered my hair to my forehead, but I didn't care. I walked along the edge of my fence, pressing the beam up the slope. That's when I heard it, a low groan, deep and ancient, as if the mountain was shifting in its sleep. I knelt, dug my fingers into the mud, and felt that the soil was loose, spongy, saturated well beyond its limit. One more storm, I thought, and gravity would do the rest. The next morning, I drove straight to the county office, my folders thick with evidence. I carried photographs of the slope, time-stamped videos from my trail cameras, rainfall logs showing saturation rates, even Klein's signed memo. The clerk at the zoning desk barely looked up as she stamped my submission. "We'll review this and get back to you," she said flatly, sliding the papers into a stack that already looked a mile high. "Ma'am," I said, trying to keep the anger from my voice, "this isn't a pothole complaint. That slope is moving. If you don't act, people are going to lose their homes." She sighed, scribbled a note on a sticky pad, and nodded. "I'll flag it urgent." Urgent. I'd heard that word before. It usually meant too late. That evening, the HOA held another meeting. Sophia stood at the podium like a queen on her throne, dripping confidence in a tailored pink blazer and diamond earrings that sparkled under the chandelier she'd insisted the HOA install last year. The room was packed, whispers bouncing off the velvet chairs. Word had spread that one of the retaining walls near Lot 3 had already buckled during the rain. Sophia cleared her throat and smiled. "Good evening, everyone. I know there's been some concern, but let me reassure you the resort project is safe, secure, and fully permitted. We've consulted professionals and everything is under control." I stood holding my folder. "That's a lie." Gasps rippled through the room. Sophia's smile froze. I walked to the front, placed my folder on the side table, and faced the crowd. "I've measured 4 separate soil shifts since the blasting began. One retaining wall has already failed. These aren't opinions. These are measurements, photographs, signed reports from licensed engineers. If we don't stop construction now, we're risking lives, your children's, your homes." Sophia raised her hand like a conductor silencing an orchestra. "Mr. Brown, this board has already reviewed your concerns." "No," I cut in, my voice louder than I intended. "You didn't review anything. You dismissed them. You didn't distribute my documents. You didn't inform homeowners that Klein's report even existed." The room erupted into whispers. Rosa Thompson raised her hand, voice trembling. "My kitchen tiles cracked last week." "Are you saying that's connected?" Sophia waved her off. "Coincidence. Homes settle all the time." "Not like this," I snapped, pulling out a photo. "This is Lot 3. The slope has slumped 4 feet in 3 weeks. That's not settling. That's collapse in slow motion." Another neighbor, Tom Delaney, stood, his voice sharp. "Is this true, Sophia? Did you ignore these reports?" Sophia's cheeks flushed crimson. "This is fear-mongering. We followed every code. Every permit was approved." "Permits don't make a mountain stable," I shot back. "You can't legislate geology." The room fell into chaos. Some shouted at Sophia, others at me. But beneath the noise I could sense it. Doubt had crept in. Seeds of resistance were sprouting. Sophia banged her gavel, trying to regain control. This meeting is over. She stormed off her heels, clicking like gunshots on the polished floor. The next morning, I found a rock through my truck window. No note, but the message was clear: shut up or else. Later, a notice appeared taped to my door. You are in violation of Article 4, Section 3B of the HOA Code, unauthorized distribution of materials without board consent. Fine, $250. I laughed bitterly. They were fining me for warning them about their own negligence. But the laughter faded as I picked glass out of my truck seat. If Sophia thought intimidation would silence me, she hadn't been listening to the mountain. I contacted my old friend Ricky Hampton, a lawyer who specialized in construction liability. I emailed him the cease and desist. Sophia's attorney had sent me a sloppy document full of threats about libel and defamation. Ricky called me within the hour. Michael, he chuckled, this is a bluff. They don't have a leg to stand on. You want me to fire back? Not yet, I said. Let them bury themselves first. Because when the rain really comes, the mountain will speak louder than I ever could. And the rain was coming. Forecasts warned of an atmospheric river forming over the Pacific, a storm system capable of dumping inches of rain day after day, the kind of storm that wakes dead rivers and feeds old landslides. I reinforced my drainage lines, cleared my gutters, moved photo albums to the attic. My hands shook as I hammered plywood over the basement vents. By the second day of rain, water gushed down the slope like veins of mercury. My trail cameras lit up all night, capturing soil, slumping in slow-motion rocks, tumbling like dice. At 2:17 a.m., one alert jolted me awake. On the screen, I saw a 20-foot section of the ridge peeling off, sliding down like wet cake. The debris stopped just short of the service road, leading to Sophia's mansion in progress. I screenshotted it, labeled it, logged it, proof, evidence, a timestamp of inevitability. But Sophia didn't slow down. By 8 in the morning, bulldozers were back, pouring concrete footers for another retaining wall. I walked up the hill, rain lashing my face, and called out across the orange fencing. You lost part of the slope last night, I shouted over the engines. Shut this down before someone dies. Sophia, in a white raincoat and matching boots, turned to me with eyes full of contempt. Michael, if you're here to throw another tantrum, this isn't a tantrum. That was a soil failure. You're stacking weight on unstable terrain in the middle of an active storm. You're begging for disaster. She rolled her eyes, turned to her cousin. Vince, remove him. Vince smirked, walking toward me. You've made your point, Brown. Go home. I stepped back from the fence. Just remember this conversation when the slope moves again. And it will. There'll be a timestamp, there'll be video, there'll be court records, and there'll be blood on your hands. Sophia sneered. You're just a lonely old man with a god complex. You don't run this community. I do. She wasn't wrong about the loneliness. The house had been too quiet since my wife passed. But she was dead wrong about the second part. She didn't run the land. The mountain did, and the mountain was done whispering. The storm did not rage, it built. Hour by hour, the rain pressed down harder, saturating the mountain until every slope wept with rivulets of brown water. By the third day, Silver Crown wasn't just wet, it was groaning. You could hear it at night, a sound like furniture settling in an old house, except this furniture was thousands of tons of soil and fractured granite. Every creak was a warning. Every groan was a countdown. I hardly slept. I stayed wrapped in my old military blanket, sitting by the window with my laptop open to the feeds from my trail cameras. Each alert pinged like a gunshot to my nerves. At 1:42 a.m., a frame caught a boulder rolling loose from the scarred ridge. At 2:17, a sheet of mud slid 20 yards before halting at the service road. And at 3:03, one of the retaining walls at Lot 2 leaned 2 inches out of plumb. I documented everything, labeling the files meticulously. Negligence, Phase 2. By dawn, the storm was relentless. Water gushed through drainage ditches, overflowing into yards. Gutters roared like waterfalls. The stream that usually trickled through the valley swelled into a raging torrent, chewing away at its banks. Neighbors texted me frantically, cracks in foundations, doors that wouldn't close, tile floors buckling. At 7:30 a.m., despite the weather, construction crews arrived. I could see them from my porch, silhouettes in ponchos and hard hats. The bulldozers roared to life, mud spraying from their tracks as they lumbered uphill. Sophia's white SUV pulled in minutes later. She stepped out, dressed as if she were attending a fashion show, a pristine raincoat cinched at the waist, designer boots stomping into the muck. And behind her, of course, came the cameras, her hired videographer capturing every second of her oversight, as if she were a heroine saving the day. I couldn't take it anymore. I pulled on my boots, grabbed my waterproof binder of documents, and marched up the muddy road. When I reached the orange fencing, Vince, her cousin and contractor, glared at me. "Not today, Brown. We're working. This slope lost 20 feet of soil last night," I barked. "You can't pour more concrete on a failing structure." Sophia turned visibly annoyed. "Michael, do you practice your speeches in the mirror? Because every time you open your mouth, the sky doesn't fall. The mountain doesn't collapse. It's all just drama. You think geology runs on your schedule?" I snapped. "It doesn't scream, Sophia, it warns. And you've ignored every warning." The rain intensified, hammering the hood of my jacket. Water streamed through the cut slope behind her, carving channels in the raw soil. I pointed. "Look, that's piping erosion. Those channels will undermine your footers before you even finish pouring." She turned to Vince. "Get him out of here." He smirked, stepping closer. I backed away, but I didn't stop. "You'll regret this. Every shovel you move today, every pound of concrete is evidence against you. When this collapses, and it will, your name will be on the death certificate." Her face twisted, fury seeping through her perfect smile. "You're nothing but a bitter old man trying to sabotage progress. You don't run this HOA. I do." I left before Vince could shove me mud-sucking at my boots with every step. My heart pounded with rage and dread. Not because I'd been insulted, I was used to that, but because I'd just seen something Sophia refused to acknowledge. The slope was actively failing. It wasn't a question of if. It was a question of when. That night, the storm reached its peak. Sheets of rain battered rooftops. Trees swayed violently, their roots clutching at ground that no longer wanted to hold them. At 3:41 a.m., the sound came, the one I'd been waiting for, the one I'd been dreading. It was not a crash. It was not a single boom. It was a roar, deep and primal, like the earth itself was tearing open. My house shook. Pictures fell from the walls. I bolted onto the deck, flashlight trembling in my hand, and watched as Silver Crown Mountain unleashed her fury. At first, the slide moved almost gracefully, a slow surge of mud spilling like thick lava. But then it accelerated, ripping trees from their roots, hurling boulders the size of cars, swallowing fences whole. The service road vanished. And then, in one horrifying moment, Sophia's half-built mansion, her crown jewel, buckled. The steel beams twisted like paper straws. The glass framework shattered with a sound like breaking ice. The entire structure tilted forward and disappeared into the churning mass of earth. The lights cut out. The roar grew louder. And then, just as quickly as it had begun, silence. I stood frozen, rain soaking me to the bone, heart pounding in my ears. From the valley below, faint screams echoed. A floodlight flicked on near one of the trailers that had miraculously survived. People ran uphill with radios, but they couldn't reach the site. There was nothing to reach. The mansion was gone. By dawn, the neighborhood was chaos. Fire trucks and rescue vehicles lined the road. Neighbors huddled in blankets, eyes wide with fear. Rosa clutched her child, sobbing. Tom Delaney's voice cracked as he tried to explain to a firefighter about the cracks in his foundation. Helicopters circled overhead, cameras capturing the scar gouged into the mountain. And then, staggering out of the mud, was Sophia Williams. Her pristine raincoat was torn and caked with filth. Her mascara ran in black streaks down her pale cheeks. She didn't scream, didn't shout. She just stared at me across the crowd, her eyes hollow, as if I had summoned the mountain myself to punish her. But it wasn't me. It was never me. It was gravity. It was arrogance colliding with inevitability. Later, as I handed my waterproof case of documents to the county officials, photos, measurements, Klein's memo, rainfall data, I felt no triumph, no vindication, only exhaustion, because while Sophia's mansion lay buried under 30 feet of mud, the mountain wasn't finished. It had spoken once, it could speak again, and now finally the world was listening. The hours after the landslide were a blur of sirens, shouts, and the hollow thrum of helicopter blades cutting through the mist. The county had dispatched search and rescue, their floodlights sweeping over the scarred mountain face like frantic fingers probing a wound. Neighbors clustered along the barricades, clutching blankets and styrofoam cups of coffee, handed out by volunteers. Their faces were pale, drained the shock of what we had all just witnessed, etched in every furrow and trembling lip. I stood among them, but a part mud still streaked across my coat, my waterproof binder clutched to my chest. Inside were the files I had prepared for months, photographs, rainfall logs, Klein's signed declaration, slope measurements marked in millimeters, evidence that none of this was an act of God, as Sophia would inevitably claim. No, this was human-made, predictable, preventable. By mid-morning, the media arrived. Vans parked along the main road, reporters adjusting umbrellas, cameramen zooming in on the mangled remnants of Sophia's mansion now entombed in earth. The headlines wrote themselves: luxury mansion buried in silver crown, landslide, HOA dream turns disaster. Was this avoidable? Neighbors turned to me, some with gratitude, others with guilt. Tom Delaney approached his 2 children huddled against him. Michael, he said, his voice raw, you were right. God help us, you were right. Why didn't we listen? I shook my head. It's not about being right. It's about surviving what's still coming. That slope hasn't finished moving. He swallowed hard, holding his kids tighter. Sophia, meanwhile, was alive. I saw her by the triage tents, wrapped in a silver emergency blanket, mud streaked across her face. She sat stiffly, shoulders squared, even as her hands shook. The cameras swarmed her, hungry for a statement. When she finally spoke, her voice cracked, but her tone was calculated. We are working closely with county officials, she recited, reading from a damp piece of paper, to understand the unexpected geological instability that has affected our beloved community. Our thoughts are with everyone impacted. Unexpected geological instability. I nearly choked. She was spinning it already, crafting her narrative before the mud on her boots had even dried. And worse, she wasn't just dodging blame, she was setting up a scapegoat. That afternoon, a newsletter appeared in everyone's inbox. Certain individuals, it read, have contributed to panic and misinformation, complicating the community's response. No names, but everyone knew. My phone lit up with texts from neighbors. She's blaming you. Michael, don't let her twist this. I didn't intend to. By evening, I drove into town and hand-delivered my waterproof binder to the county planning office. Dean Rollins, the head of land use, an old colleague of mine, met me in the lobby. His face was lined with exhaustion. Michael, he said, shaking my hand, I saw the footage this morning. It's bad, real bad. It's going to get worse if they don't halt construction, I replied, sliding the binder across the desk. Here's everything. Photos, rainfall data, Klein's memo, historic maps. They ignored every warning. This wasn't nature. It was negligence. Dean flipped through the pages, nodding grimly. We've already suspended new permits. But Sophia and her board are lawyering up, calling it an act of God. God didn't swing the dynamite, I said coldly. She did. He exhaled, rubbing his temples. We'll need a formal deposition. Would you testify? Gladly. When I left the office, the media vans were still parked outside, lights glowing against the rain. A reporter shoved a microphone toward me. Mr. Brown, did you predict this landslide? I paused, choosing my words. I didn't predict it. I documented it. I warned them. And I was ignored. The clip aired that night. My phone buzzed, non-stop emails, voicemails, even messages from strangers across the country. Some were supportive. Others accused me of fear-mongering, of trying to profit off tragedy. Sophia's spin machine was working overtime, but so was the truth. The next few days were chaos. Insurance adjusters prowled the neighborhood, clipboards in hand, photographing cracks and collapsed patios. Engineers from the state set up monitoring equipment along the ridge. Helicopters circled twice daily, filming the scar for the evening news. And yet, even in the face of all this, Sophia did not back down. 3 days after the slide, a flyer appeared in every mailbox, notice of interim development, HOA leadership stands strong. Her name was at the bottom alongside Vince's and Cynthia's, her loyal board member. The flyer blamed unforeseeable climate conditions and geotechnical irregularities outside the scope of analysis. Not a word about blasting. Not a word about warnings. Not a word about negligence. That night, I hosted an unofficial neighborhood meeting on my back porch. 30 people showed up, soaked from the mist, faces drawn tight with fear and anger. I brewed 2 pots of coffee and opened a bottle of scotch for those who needed something stronger. She lied to us, Rosa said, tears brimming. She told us the reports were fine. My insurance won't cover the damage, Tom added, because the construction was flagged as high risk and nobody told me. Do we have grounds to sue? Someone asked. Yes, I said simply, we do, but only if we act together. I laid out the plan file, a collective complaint, demand a full audit of the HOA, and push for Sophia's removal. For the first time since this nightmare began, I saw something flicker in their eyes, not just fear, but resolve. The meeting ended with signatures on a petition. By sunrise, 40 names filled the page. Sophia's empire was cracking, not just in the mountain, but in the community she thought she ruled. Still, the battle wasn't over. Anonymous posts began to circulate online, accusing me of tampering with the slope, of stirring panic to make Sophia look bad. One morning I opened my mailbox to find a letter typed in all caps. The mountain fell because you wanted it to. I took it straight to the sheriff's office. The deputy read it twice, jaw tight. You think this came from Sophia? I think it came from someone she let believe that story, I replied. He slipped the letter into an evidence sleeve. She's already lawyering up. That means her version of events is going to spread whether it's true or not. I left the station, sat in my truck, and stared at the rain streaking the windshield. My wife used to say I had a mountain brain, always humming, always sensing when the ground was uneasy. If she were here, she'd tell me not to let the lies get to me. But the lies were getting louder, and I knew this fight was far from finished. Because Sophia wasn't done clawing at control. And Silver Crown Mountain wasn't done speaking. The courthouse didn't feel like justice. It felt like a waiting room for ghosts, gray carpet flickering, fluorescent lights, the smell of stale coffee, and an undercurrent of fear that clung to every sigh. But I wasn't there to be comfortable. I was there because Sophia had done what I expected her to do. She filed a counterclaim against me, accusing me of inciting panic, of sabotaging construction timelines, even of contributing to destabilization by my constant warnings. The irony nearly made me laugh. According to her lawyers, the landslide wasn't her fault. It wasn't the blasting or the cutting or the arrogance of planting a glass mansion on fractured granite. No, it was me, the retired engineer, the man who spent sleepless nights logging slope data, who had somehow destabilized an entire mountain by daring to speak. But this time I wasn't alone. My attorney Dana Merriweather was a force of nature in her own right. Sharp-tongued, meticulous, unshaken by theatrics. She specialized in construction liability and HOA corruption, and she believed in my case so fiercely it frightened me. On the morning of the hearing, she clasped my shoulder with steel grip. "We're not here to play defense, Michael. We're here to end their game." Inside the courtroom, Sophia sat flanked by two lawyers. Gone were her pastel blazers and golden brooches. She wore navy now, hair pulled back severely, her face pale beneath the lights. Rebranding, I thought. Camouflage. But no blazer could hide the cracks in her composure. The judge, Justice Ballinger, didn't waste time. "We are here to determine whether Mr. Michael Brown's statements and reports are protected speech under California's anti-SLAPP statute." Her voice was gravel-wrapped in velvet, measured, authoritative. "Miss Williams, your counsel may proceed." Sophia's lead lawyer, Byron Hale, rose smoothly, brushing imaginary lint from his sleeve. He was polished, media-trained, every word honed for cameras as much as for the judge. "Your Honor, this is a textbook case of hindsight bias. My client, Miss Williams, followed every protocol. Permits were secured, contractors licensed, experts consulted. The suggestion that Mr. Brown's alarmist communications did not stir panic in the community is naive. His public postings undermined confidence, delayed responses, and may have indirectly contributed to environmental destabilization." The judge's eyebrows lifted. "You're suggesting Mr. Brown's warnings caused the slope to fail?" "Not directly," Byron said with a hint of a smile. "But destabilization is a chain reaction. Panic can affect timelines, which can in turn affect soil retention. His interference had consequences. My blood boiled. They were trying to alchemize lies into truth. But Dana was ready. She stood calmly, voice steady as iron. In 2019, Mr. Brown submitted 3 separate geological assessments to the HOA, and to county officials she began holding up a color-coded folder. These reports were substantiated by photographic evidence, independent expert analysis, and historic precedent. In 2020, under Miss Williams's leadership, blasting began, despite documented warnings. In 2021, a landslide destroyed her mansion in progress, endangered residents, and caused irreversible ecological damage. Now, the very board that ignored warnings seeks to silence the whistleblower who tried to prevent tragedy. She turned toward the judge. "This isn't just an abuse of process. It is a betrayal of public trust. Mr. Brown didn't incite panic. He incited reality." The judge leaned back, studying us. Silence stretched like a taut wire. Finally, she spoke. "The anti-SLAPP motion is granted. The counterclaim is dismissed with prejudice. Miss Williams's legal team is ordered to pay the respondent's legal fees." The words landed like thunder. Sophia's jaw clenched. Byron whispered furiously in her ear, but she didn't move. Her hands tightened on the polished veneer of the table, knuckles white. In that moment I saw it. The fracture. Not in the slope, but in her empire. Outside, the courthouse reporters swarmed. Dana spoke first, her voice sharp as a blade. "This is a victory for truth, and for every resident who has ever been silenced by bureaucracy or bullied by those in power. Michael Brown did what the HOA would not. He listened to the land. I didn't want to speak, but a microphone was shoved in my face. My words came low and heavy. There are still homes at risk. This was never about me. It's about making sure what happened on that mountain doesn't happen again. That night, my phone lit up with messages. Strangers from Utah, Colorado, Nevada, people who had lived through landslides, floods, HOA greed reached out. Some had lost homes. Some had lost family. They thanked me for speaking, for fighting. But many warned Karen types don't surrender. They doubled down. They were right. A week later, Sophia emerged again, standing at a podium by the construction site with a new lawyer at her side. His name was Byron still, but sharper now, more theatrical. Cameras clicked as he spoke, his words dripping with sympathy crafted to mislead. This was a tragedy rooted in unpredictable environmental shifts, he declared. Assigning blame to two well-meaning community leaders, especially based on hindsight, serves no one. We urge the public not to be misled by individuals presenting themselves as experts, especially those with personal grievances. The cameras swung toward me, standing in the crowd. My neighbors murmured. Sophia's eyes found mine cold and defiant. That night I appeared on Channel 5 News. The anchor asked Mr. Brown, "Did you predict this landslide?" I looked straight into the camera. I didn't predict it. I documented it. I warned of it, and I was ignored. Do you believe the HOA is trying to make you the scapegoat? I believe power doesn't like accountability. When you can't silence someone with process, you try to smear them. That's what's happening here. Do you feel vindicated? I paused. The mountain loomed behind me on camera, wrapped in tarps and erosion fencing. No. Vindication means I got what I wanted. I never wanted this. I wanted them to stop before the mountain did what mountains always do when pushed too far. The interview aired. Support poured in. But so did the threats. Online whispers, anonymous letters muttered insults at the grocery store. Sophia's machine kept grinding, even as her mansion lay buried under 30 feet of mud. The final blow came from the State Geologic Task Force. Their preliminary report was brutal blasting, and improper grading had rendered the slope unstable in direct violation of multiple ordinances. The report cited willful disregard of geological advisement, highlighting my warnings by name. For once, the truth wasn't buried. It was in bold print. The media pounced. Headlines screamed, HOA ignored warnings, whistleblower vindicated, luxury dream geological nightmare. Sophia's empire was collapsing faster than her mansion had. Board members resigned. Investors pulled out. And whispers of recall grew into a roar. For the first time in years, I felt momentum. Not fear, not despair, but the turning of a wheel that might finally crush the arrogance that had nearly buried us all. But the fight wasn't over. Sophia wasn't gone. Not yet. And I knew she would claw at power until the very last stone slipped from her fingers. The recall vote came faster than I expected. Within 2 weeks of the task force's preliminary report, half the neighborhood had signed petitions demanding Sophia's removal. By the end of the month, the tally was overwhelming. 87% of residents voted to strip her of her title as HOA president. The empire she had built with polished speeches, glossy brochures, and intimidation collapsed with a single sheet of paper slipped under every door. Sophia Williams removed effective. Immediately. But if I thought that would be the end, I was wrong. Power never leaves quietly. For days after the recall, Sophia lingered in the neighborhood like a ghost, unwilling to vacate the house she no longer owned. I spotted her SUV parked outside Cynthia's place, her last loyal ally. Curtains twitched when I passed, but she never came out. Rumors swirled. She was meeting lawyers late at night, calling county officials, threatening lawsuits. Meanwhile, the community itself was in shambles. Dozens of homes had visible damage, cracked foundations, slumped patios, buckled driveways. Insurance companies were circling like vultures, looking for reasons not to pay out. And still above it all, the mountain loomed scarred and restless. A daily reminder that it could speak again with another storm. The interim board formed quickly, led by Rosa Thompson and Tom Delaney. They asked me to serve as their geological advisor, but I hesitated. I had spent months fighting, documenting, testifying. I was tired. My body ached from sleepless nights, my mind frayed from the constant hum of vigilance. But Rosa looked at me with those determined eyes, and Tom's children clung to his hands like anchors. "We need you, Michael," Rosa said simply. And I realized this wasn't about me anymore. It was about stewardship, about making sure no one else lived through what we had. Our first act was to halt all development permanently on the northern face of Silver Crown. The county backed us, citing the task force's findings. What was once slated to be a luxury resort was now officially unbuildable land. We proposed something radical. Instead of rebuilding, we would restore. A preserve. A sanctuary. Not just for wildlife, but for ourselves. We planted native grasses whose roots could knit the soil. Volunteers laid natural fiber mats along the gullies to slow erosion. College students studying geology came to help chart drainage patterns. Slowly, the gouges in the slope began to soften, clothed in green instead of raw, bleeding rock. The mountain wasn't healed. It never would be fully, but it was beginning to breathe again. It was during one of those volunteer days that Sophia returned. She didn't march in with cameras this time. She came alone in hiking boots and a faded jacket, her hair pulled back without the gloss of hairspray. I saw her standing at the trailhead, hesitant, almost small. For a long moment I considered ignoring her, but then she walked toward me, her steps slow, deliberate. "Michael," she said quietly, her voice stripped of the command it once carried. I wanted to see it. One last time. I studied her. Mud streaked her boots, her hands trembled slightly. She wasn't the woman who had laughed at my warnings in a white blazer. She was just another neighbor who had lost everything. I sold the last property, she admitted, staring at the scarred slope. "The highway lot. It's all gone now." I said nothing. "I've been volunteering at an environmental center in Colorado," she added, her voice barely audible. "Teaching kids about watersheds, about how fragile land can be." I turned to her. "Do you tell them about Silver Crown?" A bitter laugh escaped her lips. "Only the parts I can say without choking." We stood in silence. Finally, she reached into her pocket and pulled out a smooth stone, dark and teardrop-shaped. "I found this after the slide," she said, placing it on the bench between us. "I kept it. I don't know why. Maybe to remind myself." I didn't pick it up, neither did she. The stone stayed there, a quiet marker of everything lost and everything learned. Before she left, she looked at me with wet eyes. "I wanted to hate you. For a long time I did. I thought you were trying to humiliate me, but you were trying to stop me from killing someone." Her throat tightened. "I'm sorry. I believed her not because of the words, but because she came alone. Because guilt, when it's real, doesn't shout. It whispers. And it lingers. I'm not the one who needs your apology," I told her softly. "The mountain is." She nodded, then walked away, disappearing into the trees. I never saw her again. But the stone remained. Months later, the community gathered for the first mountain renewal day. Children planted saplings. Neighbors built wooden benches from storm-felled oaks. A local poet read verses about resilience. We unveiled a plaque at the overlook, in memory of the land lost and the warnings not heard. It wasn't about blame anymore. It was about remembering. A boy no older than 10 tugged at my sleeve that day. "Are you the man who saved the mountain?" he asked, his eyes wide. I knelt, meeting his gaze. "No," I said. "The mountain saved itself. I just refused to look away." He smiled, then darted off to chase butterflies through the meadow where Sophia's mansion once stood. As I watched him, I realized the truth that had been growing in me all along. We don't own the land. We belong to it. It outlives us, forgives slower than we hope, but deeper than we deserve. And if we're wise, we learn to listen before it roars. For me, the battle with Sophia had ended, but the lesson would never fade. The scars on Silver Crown Mountain would remain for decades, softened by grass and wildflowers, but visible to anyone who cared enough to see. A reminder carved into stone: arrogance collapses, but stewardship endures. And for the first time since the landslide, I felt peace. Not silence, the mountain would never be truly silent again, but peace, the kind that comes when you finally understand your place, not above the land, not against it, but with it, always with it. If there's one thing this ordeal taught me, it's that the earth doesn't bend to our will. We can write laws, issue permits, hold votes, but none of it matters when the ground itself has spoken. Silver Crown Mountain reminded us that arrogance has consequences, and that ignoring warnings comes with a price no one can afford. But it also taught me something else. Community is stronger than fear. When we stood together, neighbors, friends, even strangers, we found a way to heal not just the land, but ourselves. And maybe that's the real legacy. So, if you've ever felt silenced, ignored, or dismissed, remember this: your voice matters, especially when you speak for the voiceless, even if it's just a mountain. Tell me, have you ever stood up to something bigger than yourself? Share your story in the comments. And if you believe in listening before the ground roars, subscribe to this channel. There are more stories to tell, and I want you with me when we do.